Hi, it's Dwyer. It's November 13th, 2025. It's early, perhaps too early. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Let's talk Anthony Joshua against Jake Paul. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, I like this fight. It's a financial bonanza. Just understand that Jake Paul against Mike Tyson drew in more viewers than Canelo against Crawford. Right? Understand, too, because of what happened in that Tyson fight. And there was a lot of mystery about Mike Tyson. What did he have left? Jake Paul is the bad boy everyone is hoping faces adversity. That Tyson fight had some dynamics, and Jake Paul won that fight convincingly. Because of the Tyson fight, now we have the question of can Jake Paul deal with a current heavyweight, one with blessed punching power. Right, folks, this is huge. Right, I'm expecting huge crowds. Boxing really is entertainment, right? And just understand, whatever you think about Jake Paul, he's bringing a lot of eyes to the sport. People are interested, whether they want to admit it publicly or not. Right? If you're in a serious conversation about the heavyweight division at your local pub, right, and someone starts talking about Jake Paul, everyone's going to laugh. But yet the numbers show that some of the people in the conversation are tuning in for Jake Paul fights. Let me say this. You know, I'm assuming the fight's a 10-round fight. I'm assuming, unlike the Tyson fight, it's going to have 3-minute rounds. Right? Anthony Joshua against world-class competition. That's who he's been fighting, right? Dubois, Usyk, right? Against world-class competition. Often against someone who either has the belt or has held the belt. Right? Anthony Joshua is a cautious fighter. Right? This is the guy who comes out and who, personality-wise, and I've never met Joshua. I don't know Joshua personally. But personality-wise, based on my takes of his fights, he's the friend you have who needs to see the lay of the land before he makes moves. This is the cautious guy. He's not the guy who starts the company. He's not Frank Sinatra. He's not going to do it his way. Right? No, this is the guy who, even when there are opportunities, he's cautious. He needs to read you. Even when there's a size gap, he's cautious. He needs to read you. He can't do that in this fight. Right? Just understand, if it's a 10-round fight, if he's fighting a guy who is going to be a decided underdog, Jake Paul, someone who, keep in mind, the betting market made an underdog against 135-pound Gervonta Davis, who in Davis's last fight didn't knock out Lamont Roach, the champion, at 130. So I'm assuming Jake Paul is going to be a decided underdog. Right? People are going to, look at this fight. Joshua is going to have a lot of pressure on him. He's going to be viewed as Goliath. And let me just say, I believe in what Wilt Chamberlain used to say. No one roots for Goliath. Right? So what Joshua's going to have to do, and it's the foundation of this fight, is he's going to have to fight this fight like he fought Otto Wallin. Now, let me just say that I've watched Joshua a long time. Right? People here online know I've been commenting on Joshua fights for years. The Joshua who fought Wallin was prime Joshua. Right? Wallin, one of the best athletes even today in the heavyweight division. Right? Better athlete than Tyson Fury. Quite frankly, should have beaten Fury. Right? Joshua comes out in that fight. That's the blueprint fight for him. Right? Let me point out, too, that Wallin southpaw, like Usyk. If Joshua fights Usyk a third time, let's just say if Joshua comes out and fights the fight he fought against Otto Wallin, you're going to have a different dynamic. Right? A third fight would be interesting. Joshua starts early against Otto Wallin. He's using his jab and he's making sure he hits Wallin in the body. Right? Joshua's aggressive early. He shed the, I'm going to see the lay of the land, I'm going to look at this guy, I'm going to feel him out. He shed that. He came after Wallin. Wallin, who has legs, had nowhere to go to. Right? Joshua on his front foot. Joshua has an excellent jab. That was the key punch he used to beat Joe Parker years ago. He has to come out against Jake Paul, and he has to let Jake Paul know, I'm going to be pumping this jab. Now here's the problem. Look at that Wallin film. Right? Joshua's center of gravity takes his head forward. Right? You know my thoughts. I prefer the Ali Vitaly Klitschko, let me lean back. Lennox Lewis, let me lean back default position. Right? So that opens the door a little bit for Jake Paul to have Joshua give away some of his height. Right? Because understand, Joshua's the biggest man Jake Paul has faced. Jake Paul needs Joshua's help. Jake Paul wouldn't survive against Vitaly Klitschko, right? Klitschko would have his head leaned back. Jake Paul, the shorter guy, would have to reach across the pocket to even hit Klitschko in the head. Right? With Joshua, it's a little bit different. Right? Joshua, even against Otto Wallin, is leaning forward. Now, if he's throwing a jab, this is righty against righty. Joshua would be throwing a left-handed jab. What's Jake Paul's best punch? What's the punch he hit Ben Askren with? Folks, it's a straight right hand. If Jake Paul has the timing right, he's going to have some opportunities to, if Joshua's active, and he needs to be. Right? He cannot assume that as the former heavyweight champion, as the former Olympic champion, that the crowd's going to be rooting for him. Right? You know, what I want him to do is to look at the Ring Magazine scoring of Canelo Crawford. And then look at the judges' scorecards. Right? Whoever we think won that fight, I understand the world thinks Crawford won that fight in a runaway. Right? Just understand, Canelo was the favorite going into that fight. He was Goliath. That's the same position Joshua's in here. Right? So Joshua's operating assumption has to be judges aren't going to do him any favors. Right? Against a guy who, you know, is viewed as a boxing outsider, whose fights are viewed as festivals, not major, boxing events. Joshua needs to realize that if it's close, he's not going to get the benefit of possession, right? Of a career spent fighting world-class fighters. Right? Understand, Joshua has been the unified heavyweight champion. So Joshua has to be active. By active, I don't mean he has to run around the ring after Jake Paul. What he has to do, though, is throw the jab. His assumption needs to be that he needs the early rounds, that he needs to be active, that he can leave nothing to chance wherever this fight is. Right? He needs to come out, he needs to pump his jab. Understand the Jake Paul dynamic is an interesting one, right? He's clearly a villain. But understand there are people out there who will go to a James Bond film and they'll root for Blofeld. They'll root for Goldfinger. Right? You know, the Jake Paul story of being an outsider, rising up. Jake Paul's the entrepreneur, a little bit different than Joshua. Jake Paul's flying the plane. He's the guy taking the risks. Right? He's the guy who in the first round is thinking, I've got to win over the crowd, and I've got to start right now. Right? He's the guy who's put an empire together. As wealthy and as profitable as Joshua has been, that's really an Eddie Hearn show, isn't it? Right? Joshua is on the matchroom plane. Jake Paul is the guy who showed up to the airport with the idea of flying, and then, like Elon Musk and SpaceX, put together the whole thing. Right? Hires the pilot, figures out the budget, figures out how to get the plane off the ground, gets the clearance, figures out where to land. Right? So Jake Paul's going to have no problem starting fast. It's a personality thing. Jake Paul knows that if he's too cautious, he gets left behind. So he's picking the right opponents, even though he was a plus 155 at one point in the betting markets for the Gervonta Davis fight. I was rolling with Jake Paul in that fight. Right? Much bigger man, folks. Here, the public's going to view Jake Paul as a guy who fought lighter guys. They're going to overlook his weight for the Tyson fight. Folks, he's well in the 220s for the Tyson fight. Right? I talk about Jake Paul having an A-level right hand. People always laugh, right? Hey, I'm not laughing. He has an A-level right hand. He can throw it as a lead or a counter. Right? So, this fight's going to have drama. Jake Paul's going to come out moving. The open question is going to be, is AJ going to come out moving? He has to. Right? People here want to see a fight. This is kind of like Tyson Fury, Francis Ngannou. Right? Here's Fury, the champ. Here's Ngannou, the MMA guy. You would have thought there would be a crowd outraged, thinking, wow, some dude in his first fight is going to fight the heavyweight champ. We'll overlook Pete Rademacher in the 50s, right? And you know the rest. I'm sure by the fourth round of that Tyson Fury, Francis Ngannou fight, outside of members of Fury's family and his team, I'm sure there were many sports fans who were thinking, man, is Ngannou gonna do this? So Joshua has to remove all doubt. He showed up to the Wallin fight, and he looked like he was in some kind of funky mood. Then he came out, and he was all business, right? Throwing the jab, coming over to Wallin, letting Wallin know, look, man, I'm coming after you. That's the Joshua who needs to show up for this fight. But, as he throws his jab, and I say a jab because it allows Joshua to be aggressive without being over-aggressive. Right? Joshua can't afford to let himself get tired. He can't afford to let himself be too open for counters. Right? He did hit the canvas a number of times against Daniel Dubois. So Joshua, in throwing his left jab, needs to realize that it lines up with Jake Paul's A-level straight right hand. So Joshua needs to be clever with it. If I'm Joshua, I look at Archie Moore films. I look at George Foreman films. In other words, he needs to throw the jab, but he needs to have a hand over so that if Jake Paul tries to counter him with some temple shot, some counter straight right hand, that he can be busy but block the shot. Right? Joshua needs to prioritize being busy, not reading the flow of the fight. In other words, if he waits for times where Jake Paul isn't in a position to throw the counter straight right hand, he might be waiting too long. Right? Let's say he's waiting so that when he throws his jab, his head's tucked and stuff like that, that might take up too much time. He needs to take Jake Paul out of the fight early. He can't do what Tyson Fury did against Francis Ngannou and allow the other guy to breathe, allow the other guy to start to show the crowd that he actually is ambidextrous. He can't allow that to happen. He needs to fight this fight, nor can he fight it the way he fought Francis Ngannou himself, where the guys are looking at each other in the pocket and Joshua's feinting and Ngannou's feinting. He can't get into a feint fest with a shorter, more coordinated. Jake Paul's an athlete, folks, if you haven't figured that out. Jake Paul. Right? So Joshua needs to fight the violent fight. Jake Paul is going to be fighting an ambush-style fight. Wasn't that what he did against Mike Tyson? Right? The way you beat an ambush fighter is that you follow him after the ambush. So if I'm Anthony Joshua, I don't use the first 3 rounds to figure out the lay of the land. I don't risk in a 10-round fight being down 0-3, right? Then needing to win the last 7 rounds. No, I have to come out like Joshua did against Wallin. My idea would be to take the first 3 rounds, right? Everyone in the arena is going to be all hyped up. I can't let Jake Paul flash hand speed. I can't let Jake Paul, have an ambush style where he starts posing for the camera and suddenly the fans start to believe that even though he hasn't landed anything that hurt me, that he's having his way. I can't afford those moments. I have to take the Jake Paul contingent out of the fight early. Right now, if I'm Jake Paul, I wonder about, ahead of the fight, the punch angles. Right? You're fighting a guy who's around, 6'6"? Right? Now, Jake Paul's been fighting much shorter guys, so when he throws that straight right hand, people are there, right? To get hit. Right? Here, he's going to have to throw the punch up to hit Joshua. Right? So if I'm Jake Paul, I think about lefts to Joshua's body. I think about how I can throw power shots, pot shot, Floyd Mayweather style, then get out of the pocket. Right? I think about dancing around the ring, maybe shuffling my feet, having some moves that might not even hurt the other guy, just to win the crowd over, to let the crowd know that I think I'm in control. But my real game is to lead with power shots on visits to the pocket. Right? He's going to have more to think about if Joshua is savvy enough to pump the jab early. Right? If I'm Joshua, I wouldn't even think about my right hand unless it's there. Right? I would think about coming out. Joshua has a better jab than people realize. If Joshua just has enough faith in it, he could do some damage. Let me also point out, too, that he was fighting Vladimir Klitschko. Right? I'm mentioning specific fights so you can pull up tapes. I believe it's around the 5th round or so of that fight. This was the biggest moment of Joshua's career up until that point because he won the title against Charles Martin. Right? You know, it's not like he beat a George Foreman to get the title. So here he was fighting a guy who was a multi-year heavyweight champion. Right? One of the best boxing events ever. Right? The crowd was hyped. The fighters themselves delivered. What I want people to do is look closely at that film. You find out a lot about a fighter when he's a punch away from winning it all. Now, Joshua drops Vladimir Klitschko. Right? Klitschko's on the canvas. It's a shocking moment in the fight. Klitschko gets off the canvas. Joshua has his choice of what punch he's going to use to end the fight. Right? Klitschko's off the canvas. Joshua is blessed with punching power in both hands. This is not Deontay Wilder. This is a two-handed guy. Joshua can knock you out with left hooks to the body. He doesn't need to throw that big right hand. What punch does he throw repeatedly after Klitschko gets off the canvas when Joshua is within an inch of winning that fight by stoppage in the 5th round? Look at the film. You're going to notice Joshua throws a punch he neglects generally. Joshua starts throwing left hooks. Right? Joshua has a great left hook. He doesn't take it out enough. So here, what I'm suggesting is that Joshua prioritized volume over power early. Right? The idea is to set the tone. I'm going to be active. You're going to have to deal with my jab, which is one of the better jabs in the heavyweight division. Then, if the opportunity presents itself, and he can be guarded. In other words, he has the right hand prepared for a counter and to block shots. Right? He can turn over the left jab into a hook. In other words, if he's throwing the jab, then he notices that Jake Paul is ducking under it. Then he can time it so then he throws the left hook he threw repeatedly to try to end the Vladimir Klitschko fight. Right? Let me also say, too, that if I'm Joshua, like Dmitry Bivol against Arthur Beterbiev, I have plans to take a round off. Let's remember that Vladimir Klitschko-Joshua fight, when Joshua was younger, you know, Joshua's bone tired, right? Joshua himself gets knocked down. When he gets off the canvas, he looked exhausted. That was in the middle of the fight. He can't afford a round like that here against Jake Paul. Right? So if I'm Joshua, look at the Bivol-Beterbiev films. Right? It's clear that Bivol, I would argue, takes 3 rounds off. But it's clear that Bivol comes out some rounds and decides, I'm going to rest. If I'm Joshua, and I don't tell anyone, because the press is going to leak everything, right? Except my close team, right? I'm talking with my trainer. I would plan to take the 4th round off. You know, unless he has Jake Paul reeling around the ring on the verge of getting stopped at the end of the 3rd, I would plan to take a round off. And I would pre-pick it. Right? This way, I have less to think about in the flow. So if I'm up by 2 rounds, 3 rounds, you know, and we get to, let's say, the 4th round or the 5th round, I can say, okay, I've planned to take this round off so I can finish strongly. Right? So, folks, I think this is going to be an interesting fight. I think the crowd that believes This is an absolute mismatch, is kidding themselves. The Jake Paul you saw early in his career against Nate Robinson, doesn't Robinson have Jake Paul in the corner? That guy no longer exists. Look at the movement against Mike Tyson. Jake Paul has the legs to move, right? So, if I'm Joshua, I'm prepared to throw my jab. I'm prepared to throw the jab to the body. But at all times, and I mean this, at all times, he needs to be aware of the possibility of Jake Paul throwing a straight right hand counter. Jake Paul has a left hook too, but it's not close to his straight right hand, right? That's why you look at the old mongoose, right? Understand it's Archie Moore who was in George Foreman's corner early, right? And you're going to notice that Archie Moore, would throw punches but would have a hand over, right? Joshua, who gets clipped by Daniel Dubois, you can tell that Joshua's punch resistance is not what it once was, right? Joshua needs to find a way to tuck his head, guard his temple, have his glove also prevent certain shots to his chin, right? If he masters that, and I'm hearing the fight's going to happen soon, right? If he figures out that he has to block Jake Paul's straight right, and if he finds a way where he can be active while doing so, he should have the upper hand in this fight. Let me point out too, 9th round, second Usyk fight, right? 9th or 10th round, right? I don't have a photographic memory. He buzzes Alexander Usyk. Usyk puts his hands up like this, right? This is the defense Usyk has. Now we know, thanks to Daniel Dubois, that Joshua should have started targeting Usyk's body, right? In other words, Usyk prevents Joshua from throwing hooks, right? Usyk turtles. But, when hitting the body by Daniel Dubois, that first fight, Usyk went down. Go back and look at some amateur films of Beterbiev against Usyk, right? If Jake Paul thinks that the Usyk path to victory against Joshua is a blueprint that he can follow, and if Jake Paul makes the mistake of having his hands up like this, Joshua, who has devastating power, up top or down low, needs to throw that jab to Jake Paul's body, right? In other words, Joshua needs to be active. It can't be like the Usyk fight, where Usyk puts his hands up like this, the crowd rose up. They were ready. It was like, finally, one fight and 9 rounds in, we've reached a point where we're going to see Joshua dole out punishment. And you could tell Joshua didn't quite know what to do. Right, folks? He did against Otto Wallin. Right? That's the blueprint. That's some of the best Joshua I've seen. That's the blueprint he should follow. Joshua, for all the problems he's had, right? Usyk, Dubois, is not that far away from the top of the heavyweight division. Heavyweights age more slowly. A blessed puncher only has to be right once. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Right? Be critical. If you feel that Jake Paul has no chance, tell us why. If you feel that Jake Paul was justifiably the underdog against a lightweight, a guy out of 135, tell us about that. I do know there's a video here online where some boxers were claiming that Gervonta Davis clearly had the upper hand over Jake Paul. Let's just say I politely disagree with that assessment, right? At some point, size takes over. And for the size crowd, just understand that Jake Paul's weight against Mike Tyson wasn't that much less than some of Alexander Usyk's weights in some of his title defenses. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. In the comment section of this YouTube video, I believe Jake Paul weighed more against Mike Tyson than either Joe Frazier or Ali did for their first fight. Double check me on that. Those are my thoughts. I look forward to yours. Thanks for stopping by.